is LBC. From Global, leading Britain's conversation. A call to faith on LBC.
Yeah, good morning. 4 minutes after 9 on Thursday, the 2nd of February. A call to faith with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, joined by Cardinal Vincent Nichols, the Archbishop of Westminster, leader of the Catholic Church in England. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for coming in.
Sure. Thank you.
You may be aware you're here on a day that the CST, which is a charity set up to look after the interests and safeguard Jewish people, reported the worst year on record for a level of anti-Semitic incidents. This comes after, Archbishop, your Christmas message spoke about trying to unify a country in the post-Brexit vote, and I know, Cardinal, you kindly came by the studio and you talked about concerns with divisions within society. If I may start with you, Archbishop, what do people need to do? What do we need to do to ensure that those of other faiths, or indeed no faith, feel welcome in this country?
First of all, we have to be very robust about saying they are welcome. I think it's being positive. I mean, the difference that people of all faiths have made in this country has been extraordinary. And the Jewish community, most outstandingly, over hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think we have to face the fact that anti-Semitism has been historically deeply embedded in our society, and it must be rejected out of hand. But you do that by the positive affirmation of our welcome and of our embracing of people of different faiths, and particularly Jewish people at this time.
Is the Labour Party doing enough to address problems within itself, Archbishop?
I don't know exactly what they are doing. It is absolutely imperative that because it reaches down into so much of our history, of our bad history, that the slightest tinge of anti-Semitism has to be dealt with, and dealt with robustly and at once. And we've done that in the Church, and everyone else needs to do it as well.
Cardinal, the chief executive of the charity concerned, the CST, says that, in a way, people seem to have a freedom of expression, a licence now to express anti-Semitic views, fairly foul ones as well, in a sense they hadn't had before. It's almost like a lid has been lifted off a jar or a bottle. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think the manner and the tones of the debate before the vote on Europe didn't help. I think they really did lower the tone of our public discourse. And I think we have to gain a bit of self-discipline again and really think. There's a notice on your corridor outside, think before you tweet, and think before you speak. You know, Justin and I have been together for a few days. We see each other as brothers. We have to be able to see in the Jewish community our elder brothers. We have to be able to see in our neighbours brothers and sisters. And we have to think about those things and gain a lot more discipline and be less indulgent to the indignation that is often stirred up by leadership, political leadership, that bases itself in fear.
So when we look back at that campaign, Cardinal, do you think some of the politicians rather let us down?
I do. And I've been saying for a long time, and Justin says exactly the same thing, any leadership that trades in fear is poor leadership, and it lets down the best of British society.
Which leads me back to you, and we'll be taking calls in just a second. Alice, I think you're going to be the first caller. I just want to ask you, we talk about leadership, Archbishop. There is a new-ish leader over in the United States, and some of his policies perhaps are not necessarily those wholesome to everybody. What's your view of Donald Trump?
I think I want to echo very much what Vincent just said, that policies that are based in fear rather than confidence and courage and Christian values of hospitality, of love, of grace, of embrace rather than exclusion, are policies that will lead to terrible results. We have to say that when you start dissing whole communities, when you start excluding them, when you start mixing up those who, I mean, any country is entitled to protect its security, but when you mix up genuine threats to security with a dismissal of a whole range of communities out of fear, that's not good. And the USA is such a fantastic country. It has so much to be confident and positive about. The Anglican leaders over there are standing up for those virtues that are deeply embedded.
This is the open letter they're writing.
The open letter, yeah. and the Catholic leaders as well. I mean, we are absolutely at one on this. You know, America is built on immigration, on welcome, on courage, on a sense of grace that has inspired the world. And they don't need to act out of fear.
Would you welcome President Trump on a state visit to the United Kingdom, Archbishop?
Well, it's a matter for the government whether they invite him on a state visit. You engage with people in order to persuade them of different views, to change their views.
Well, you'd be attending a state banquet. Would you'd shake his hand and try and persuade him of other views?
If I had the opportunity to engage with him and to debate with him, I would consider it a great privilege to be able to try and persuade him to change his views.
So you think he should come, as the state visit has been offered?
As I said, that's a matter for the government. It's not something I decide.
Right.
I decide or will make much difference what I think. But I know that from my own past in dealing with some very complicated situations, both in the UK and overseas, I would be, and I'm sure Vincent as well, very glad to have the opportunity to seek to persuade him that what he's doing, the way this is going, is out of fear and needs to go back to the best of US history.
Cardinal, what would you say to the President?
Well, I would want to say you have to discriminate. You know, it is often unjust not to discriminate. Sometimes we're very fond of saying that, you know, all discrimination is wrong. But it isn't. We have to justly discriminate, and to identify a whole people, a whole nation or a whole religion as the enemy is a desperate road to go down. And it does two things. One, it creates the impression that Christianity belongs in the West, and therefore, you know, it puts the Christians in the Middle East at even greater jeopardy. And secondly, it does nothing to help the Muslim community deal with the tensions within it. So we have to discriminate between people and not put them together in a lump. Down that way goes disaster.
Let's give my listeners an opportunity to put some calls to you. First up is Alice in Amersham. Alice, you're through to both, but let's start with the Archbishop. Alice, go ahead. What's your question? Good morning.
Hello, I'm a 39-year-old bisexual woman living in Amersham, and I would love to marry my female partner in church, but the church is pushing me and others like me away from the LGB community, and surely the bottom line would be that God teaches us to treat everyone equally and not judge. So my question would be, when will the church finally treat gay and straight people as equal in every way, and what is stopping you and the church making a bold and just move on this matter?
Alice, thank you. Stay on the line. Archbishop.
Well, Alice, thank you very much. It's a question I was sort of more or less expecting. I think I'd want to say two things. First of all, you're right, the church has had a bad history, and the way in which we speak and engage and the attitudes we take has to change dramatically, and we said that last week, and we have to repent of the wrong attitudes we've had in the past. Secondly, as the Bishop of Manchester said on Sunday in a radio interview, it's no use promising something we can't deliver, and 3 years of talking to each other and listening to each other makes it clear that there isn't a view in the church of changing the teaching on marriage, and that teaching on marriage isn't the Church of England's to change. I mean, it's part of the global church, and Vincent's own church, the Roman Catholic Church, globally 15, 20 times our size, has the same view on marriage, that marriage is a lifelong union of man and woman, which has been the history of teaching on marriage since the church has ever existed. But in the Church of England, the process is continuing, and we have got a long way to go, and we've got to learn. And I'm not pretending that where we are at the moment in our attitudes, in our ways of speaking, is something that we've got to the end of the road on.
Alice, response from you?
Well, Alice, good morning. As Archbishop Justin just said, the follower of Christ's first duty is to be faithful to Christ. And, his word to us, which we believe to be the word of God, without any doubt, is that the proper place and our proper understanding of marriage is that it's between a man and a woman, and it is to be understood in the context of the continuation, the nurture of children. That is done the nurture of children is done in many different ways. But the fact that, a state in its response to the situation in which it lives changed its laws about marriage and changes the definition of marriage gives us Christians a real challenge and a real dilemma. But our first loyalty, our first fidelity is to the teachings of Christ. Now, as Justin says, that means we learn, along with everybody else, about ingrained unjust prejudice, and we try and learn and listen to people like you and to your experience and to your experience of love in your life, and we try and accompany that. But our first duty is to be faithful to the one we call our Lord and Master, and to receive what he wants to give us.
Alice, how would you respond to either the Cardinal or the Archbishop? Alice, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes.
How would you respond to either Archbishop or the Cardinal, Alice?
Yeah. In the old days, people would never have considered, obviously, marrying the same sex, and marriage was for many money reasons and maybe procreation. But obviously, as you said, things have moved forward. So why are we constantly going to be stuck in the past? Why can't? Because you're just going to push more and more people away. And having spoken to some friends last night on Facebook about this, and it will end up just pushing more and more people of my generation away. So when finally is something going to change? Because I would think God ultimately loves everybody who we are. So it shouldn't be this complicated.
Archbishop, why the delay?
Because we're part of, because as Vincent said, the teachings of Christ in the Bible are absolutely clear. We call him our Lord and Master, and we have to obey what he says. Now, I think we need...
But he wouldn't want to reject people like Alice who want to go... you would know better than I, but I couldn't imagine that he'd want to reject people from the church.
Well, you'd know as well as I would. God embraces and reaches out to every human being, and that embrace is one of unquestioning love and grace, but he's God. We obey what he tells us. I think one of the areas that we fail, that I'm conscious that the church has failed, is in valuing the kind of relationship Alice has, which often has a quality of love that puts some traditional marriages to shame in terms of generosity and acceptance. I've said that before for many years. And we have to learn and think and continue to listen. This is a journey that is complicated. The Pope published something last year which called Amoris Laetitia, which is very beautiful about the journey on which we're travelling as churches together with Christ, in obedience to him, but seeking to love the world in which we live.
Let's move to other questions. Julie, you're in Woking. Your question. Good morning, Julie.
Oh, hello. My question is, it's about the prevalence of child sexual abuse in our country now, and I just would like to know what the Archbishop and the Cardinal are doing as heads of their respective churches to alleviate the suffering of the victims, and also to bring to light the child abuse that touches every echelon of our society, including the church.
And this, of course, comes, Archbishop, as the papers are reporting today. You last night issued an unreserved and unequivocal apology. You admitted the church had failed to report abuse of teenage boys. You'd actually worked at a holiday camp at which these boys were allegedly groomed for abuse. The church failed terribly by not reporting John Smythe, QC, the head of the Christian charity that run the summer camps, to the police. Smythe, has had no comment. Archbishop.
Yes, I was at that particular camp in the mid-70s, and I was young then. I was 19 to 22, I should think, 21, 22. And I was completely unaware of any abuse.
Never heard anything?
I never heard anything at all, at any point. I never had the slightest suspicion that there was anything going on. There was no visible
What sort of person was John Smythe, as you recall him?
Well, as I recall him, he was charming, delightful, very clever, brilliant speaker. I wasn't a close friend of his. I wasn't in his inner circle or in the inner circle of the leadership of the camp. Far from it. And then I went off to work in France in 1978, which is when I'm told the abuse began. It may have been earlier or later, I don't know. And I was abroad during the time that the report was done and had no contact with them at all.
So when were you made aware of the allegations concerning Mr. Smythe?
I think it was late 2013 or early 2014.
What did you do then?
Well, I was told that the Bishop of Ely, it fell within his diocese, had been informed by a survivor of what had happened and had written to the police. So we checked that indeed the police had been contacted immediately, as our church rules. I mean, to answer the question, certainly in both churches, we have tightened it up to a degree that is extraordinary. We've now got, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years in the Church of England, we've tightened up enormously, with safeguarding officers in every diocese, with a safeguarding team that's gone from 1/2 full-time person when I took over. We've now got 6 full-time people and so on. But what I did was check. We checked that the police had been informed, and they had been, and
what further interest did you take, Archbishop?
well, we keep an eye on it, obviously, but I hadn't heard
Something of that magnitude. Did you not consult the bishop again and ask what's happened, what progress has been made?
We kept in touch and found out what was going on. But as you know, John Smythe had moved, as I understand, to Zimbabwe in the early 80s, something like that. And I think, and the police, it was not within their jurisdiction any longer. He was in Zimbabwe and then South Africa.
But you must have had a thirst to get to the bottom of what on earth might have gone on at the camp at which you worked.
I indeed was very anxious.
How many calls did you put into the Bishop of Ely? Did you have meetings with him? What happened?
I meet the Bishop of Ely very often. I discussed it on something like this because of the responsibilities. I discussed it. It was dealt with the National Safeguarding Team as they came on board, and we've kept in touch with what's been going on.
With hindsight, should you have handled it differently in any way?
No, I mean, we were sure that it was being rigorously handled by the Bishop of Ely according to normal church, the way the church does it. As I say, the report, which was done in 1982, nobody knew about it within the church for almost 30 years after that.
And you're cooperating with police now?
Absolutely. I mean, that's standard practice.
Let's come to the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, Cardinal, and I've known you for many years, and it's tough to say this to your face, but your church has been beset with hideous problems. People have not been in control, have they?
Well, we started really learning about these things and acting 20 years ago. And I think...
Not very quickly, respectfully, Cardinal.
Every year since then, we've published an annual report of numbers and of how each case proceeds. But what I'd like to get back to, if you don't mind, is Julie's question.
Yep.
Because I thought it was very well put, and she put the emphasis in her comments on the victims. And I think that's what we should be doing. That's not to escape or to avoid my own responsibility. But it took me a long time, and only through sitting down and talking with people who'd been abused in their childhood to realise the radical damage that is done to a personality. And what is doubly tragic, and therefore doubly scandalous, is when this happens in the context of a person's faith. Not only is their capacity to relate faithfully and readily with other people, but also their capacity to relate and understand God and the mystery of their own life, that's damaged as well. So we really ought to not skip over the situation of the victims in order to have, sometimes a good ding-dong about whose responsibility it was. Now, as I say, for 20 years we've been learning about this, and you can see, as Julie said, that these are not issues confined to the churches.
No.
And as a society, we're learning, and that is a very, very good thing.
No, you're absolutely right. But how confident are you that the safeguarding that we heard from the Archbishop coming to the Catholic Church, there is enough safeguarding and enough apparatus in place that it can't happen again? How confident are you?
In as much as anyone can say it will never happen again, I am reasonably confident. Yes, we have worked very hard on these things. But as Justin says, a perpetrator of child abuse is inevitably a very devious and a very clever person, and it really does take some digging out. I think the Football Association are learning that, for example.
Yes.
Now, but again, we really ought to concentrate and say, how can we help? How can we be of assistance? How can we try and mend some of this awful damage that is done?
And just lastly on this, before we move to other questions, Archbishop, have you stayed in contact with John Smythe?
No. I in my statement yesterday, I didn't say I'd had no contact. I have a vague feeling I may have had a Christmas card in the 90s, but
more than that?
No. And he came through, when I was living in Paris, he passed through once and I shook hands with him and said good morning. But, I mean, that's the limit.
All right. To other calls. Let's go to Judith in Whitstable. Judith, you're on the phone. Oh, you're on the radio. And good morning.
Oh, good morning. Good morning,
Judith.
Archbishop.
Good morning, Judith.
I'd like to know why you interfered with the referendum vote, encouraging us to vote to remain. I'd like you to apologise for your...
Just so that we get... What do you recollect the Archbishop having said? Because I need some education on this. What did he say, Judith, do you think?
That he was encouraging us to vote to remain. It was very strong. I now won't go to church because of it. I was so appalled. He had no right.
Well, I know the Archbishop will want to talk to you directly. I just have to say, as a journalist, I don't recall that story, and if the Cardinal had made an opinion, or the Archbishop would have made an opinion, it would have been front-page news, let me tell you, because they can't make an opinion. But that's enough from me. You need to persuade someone to come back to the flock, Archbishop.
I do remember I wrote a blog, I think it was, which I commented on, as Vincent has said earlier, the irresponsible nature of the dialogue.
I remember that, yeah.
And at the end, I thought it was honest to say, I didn't say everyone should vote, I said it's a purely personal opinion, as that I was going to vote Remain. And, I'm a voter like everybody else.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me to be dishonest to write a blog, and I didn't say everybody should vote Remain, I said everybody should make up their own minds and do what they choose to do, which indeed they did.
So what would you say to Judith? I recall all of this, by the way, and thank you for the detail there, but what would you say to Judith to try and get her to come back to church?
I'd say the church, within the church, we have loads of different views about this. We have people who regret that we voted Leave. We have people who are delighted we voted Leave. I obviously accept that we voted Leave, and when it comes to the vote in the House of Lords, I'll be supporting the Brexit bill. But I would say to her, it's about Jesus Christ. It's not about what particular Archbishop says, their personal opinions.
Judith?
The thing is, Archbishop, you have a position of power, and people listen to you. Whatever your views were, I think you should have kept them to yourself, as so many of us did, and people, again, with influence. You tried to influence whatever you say. You had no, as a person with such power, you had no right to express what you were going to do. You should have kept neutral, and you didn't. And I find that quite...
Well, Judith, I understand what you're saying. I weighed it up at the time very carefully, and maybe I got it wrong. You may well be right. And if I'm wrong, I apologise. Very much so, and I will think again about what you've said. But it seemed to me to write something and not be honest about where I was coming from was manipulative. And so I was trying to avoid being dishonest.
Let's go to other calls. Stafford's in Dulwich. You address the Cardinal, though we'll get the Archbishop on this as well. Stafford, good morning. What's your question?
Hi, good morning, gentlemen. My question is just regarding, obviously, Donald Trump's Muslim ban with the power to extend to other countries. What is your opinion on the fact that in this particular presidential order, which he's actually given, it gives preferential treatment to people of Christian faith or other minority religions?
This is a sense that, although it's not really a Muslim ban, it's a ban on people from certain countries, but it's the sense that Christians, therefore, are giving preferential treatment if they want to gain access to the United States. Cardinal, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Well, as I said a little earlier in the programme, I think that the risk in what he's doing is identifying Christians with the West and therefore putting the Christians in the Middle East at even greater risk. And then secondly, it also, as it were, pushes all Muslims into a single enclave, whereas in fact we should be talking with them, which we do. Justin and I, we meet with Muslim leaders because within the Muslim world there are huge divisions. And the dangers that the world faces actually have their deepest origins within the Muslim world. And that's where we should be helping. You know, there are far more Muslim victims of ISIS violence across the Middle East than there are Christian victims. So I think we should be looking at every victim in the eyes and recognizing them as a person, as a human being with a story, and responding to them on that basis.
Archbishop Donald Trump has said in an interview with a Christian channel that Christians are a priority. The host, David Brody, asked Donald Trump, as it relates to persecuted Christians, do you see them as a kind of priority here? To which the president simply replied, yes. Archbishop, the idea that there's preferential treatment, how do you respond to that?
Well, I know that when we received and had the privilege of receiving a refugee family from Syria, we didn't stipulate whether they be Christians or Muslims. We said...
Are they still at Lambeth Palace?
Yes, they are. And they are wonderful. They're just wonderful people. And, it goes back to something we were saying earlier, that Jesus Christ reaches out unequivocally to all people in love. And obviously, I'm deeply involved with the Christian, with support for Christians, and that is incredibly important. And both Vincent and I know he goes to the Middle East frequently. I'm going later this year. And we seek to support Christians in every possible way. But we seek to support victims of violence in every possible way, because the poor, the marginalised, the excluded, they are the object of the love of Christ. And it's the call to every person, and especially every Christian, to show that love regardless of someone's faith. And so you don't distinguish and say, well, there's a child and he's a Muslim child and he's starving, so I'm not going to pay any attention to him. I'm only going to deal with the Christian one.
I know you want to come back in.
Well, I just want to make the point that our government's programme for bringing refugees from Syria works through the UNHCR. And it is said that this is prejudiced against Christians because Christians tend to stay away from the refugee camps. Now, there's no evidence that our government is acting, as it were, against Christians. And any evidence that that would happen, then I would certainly be protesting. I think an even hand is right. And I understand that in the people who've come from Syria, there is a due proportion of Christians, though the majority are Muslims, because the majority who are under the cosh, if you like, are the Muslim population.
And I want to really support what Vincent has just said on that. I think it's really, really important, the point that there are many more Muslim victims. He and I have good friends in the Muslim community. We meet in conditions of great friendliness. We value them, we like them. They're a wonderful part of this country. And, I think policies which seek to exclude a whole faith is just unacceptable.
And just briefly, we mentioned the family, the Syrian family. You've recently intervened in the deportation with regards to an Iraqi man. Is he in any way related to or friends with or part of the Syrian family?
No.
Totally different case. Right.
Totally different
Does the
case.
family find work? Have they found work, the Syrian family?
I don't want to go into too many details because it exposes them.
I see.
But yes, they are. They're learning English. They're working really hard. The kids are doing brilliantly, and they're just amazing. I mean, when you think what they've been through, it reduces us to tears sometimes.
Does it really?
Yeah, it's just overwhelming how brave and courageous and wonderful they are.
I'd just like to add that, one of the government's initiatives is it's just launched, or a month ago, the Community Support Programme. And this allows local communities to begin to offer directly hospitality to a refugee couple. And, in Salford, where the first of the couples who've come through a Catholic agency, we work with the Muslim community to welcome them. And there are communities all over the country which I believe have the motivation to be of help. And now there is a vehicle, the Community Sponsorship Programme, so I just encourage people to engage with that.
And
Absolutely.
lastly, I'm so sorry, Bishop. Lastly, I think your team's talked about something called Pledge to Pray, which is an initiative you're putting forward. I don't know if you want a parting word on that or what the idea behind that is. Is that you, Cardinal? You want to address Pledge to Pray?
I would. It's Justin's initiative for the week before Pentecost. Thy kingdom come, and yes, let's pray that the richness of the Christian tradition and its beauty and its truth can again get into the bloodstream of this nation so that we can hold our heads high and know the dignity that is ours from the love of God.
Cardinal, great to welcome you to the studio again. Thank you. Archbishop, thank you for coming round for the first time and battling with a rather bad back, so I wish you a healthy recovery. I look forward to welcoming you back to the studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you very much indeed, sir. Appearing here on LBC, where news is next.
The Archbishop of Canterbury has told LBC he never had the slightest suspicion of any wrongdoing about a former colleague who's been accused of physical abuse. Justin Welby worked with the man at a holiday camp in the 1970s, but allegations he abused teenage boys there weren't reported to the police until 4 years ago.
The report, which was done in 1982, nobody knew about it within the church for almost 30 years after that.
The Church of England has admitted it failed terribly and has apologised. The government will publish a white paper setting out its Brexit strategy later. Last night, a bill to allow the Prime Minister to trigger Article 50 was overwhelmingly backed by MPs. LBC weather, rain moving